Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. In this episode, I speak with Ali Fenn. Ali is the president of ITRenew, which is a company really changing the way that information technology is recycled and reused, going from the Googles and Facebooks of this world all the way down into smaller businesses. In this conversation, we have a really good discussion about how taking a sabbatical helped Ali really focus in on that sweet spot for her, the perfect intersection of her passion and her expertise, and how some other areas that she was thinking might be the way forward actually turned out not to be for her. We also look at how she's been able to create a movement effect and real thought leadership by bringing data to bear into the discussion. And we're looking at how she maintains focus and stays effective, faced with huge demand and a wave of new opportunities. I find Ali's passion for what she does infectious, and the sense of purpose behind it is inspiring. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation with Ali Fenn. Hello, Ali, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Great to be here. I appreciate you having me.
Well, hey, I've been looking forward to this conversation because it sounds like you're doing an incredible number of innovative things in your business. So why don't we just get straight into it? You're the president of ITRenew. I know you've had a pretty diverse career up to there. So perhaps, do you want to just give us, like in that mini elevator pitch of, what are you doing now? What is ITRenew, and what have been just a couple of those major milestones on the journey for you to move into that president role?
Sure, and I'll take that in reverse order because I think it becomes clear as I do that. The quick story about me is I started my career actually as a professional athlete, which has carried with it sort of a theme of competitive nature and drive and so forth. That's kind of transferred into my professional career as well in the tech space. And I basically spent the last 20 years or so, started as an investment banker doing technology deals, and then moved into building companies. Right, I realized very quickly as a banker that I was a player and not a coach, and that I wanted to actually be hands-on and build things. And I've been building enterprise technology, software as a service, some hardware, some cloud infrastructure technology companies for the better part of the last couple of decades. And I find myself where I am today at ITRenew after taking what I think of as my adult gap year or walkabout, which I was fortunate to be able to do in 2015, a time that I sort of stepped back and had the opportunity to take a year off and really question, like, to what end? Like I've had a very, by most definitions, a very successful career. I'm quite proud of the work I've done, but I was at a point where I really wanted to kind of reconcile what I was doing with my personal interests and why, and do a little bit of a gut check on it. And I found myself focused on my personal passions around sustainability and in the environment, got very focused on first marine litter and plastics and waste and so forth, and found my way into circular economy. And then as I kind of revisited, okay, how do I turn that back into the next phase of my career, my professional career? It became clear that the opportunity for me was not to go become a marine biologist in the middle of my career, but instead to think about how do I build technology companies, do business model innovation to help us enable a more circular and less wasteful, less consumptive kind of a society. And importantly, do that in a way that's not, it's not in conflict with capitalism, right? I mean, growth and economic prosperity, all these things are quite feasible and even better if we think about more circular and more regenerative models. And so I was fortunate enough to find my way, get introduced to ID and the CEO of ITRenew. And ITRenew is a company which is operationalizing a circular economy at global scale for the IT hardware sector. So think of all the massive data centers that power everything that we do. There are millions and millions and millions of servers and racks of storage and networking and, you know, compute infrastructure deployed globally, and that's only getting bigger and bigger. And so it's, you know, historically posed a huge threat from an e-waste perspective, from a carbon perspective, and so forth, a materials, minerals perspective. And if we can think about doing much more interesting things with that equipment, creating second lives, third lives, really interesting kind of cascading pathways for equipment, there's a huge sustainability opportunity. So it's a way for me to combine sort of my professional expertise in tech and my personal passion for sustainability and climate. And so here I am.
That's really inspiring. In fact, I realize it shouldn't be me doing this interview. It should be my wife at this point, because she's a sustainability director in a tech company. So we should get you two together at some point.
For sure.
So there's lovely things you said there. I mean, first of all, I love, you know, this sense of purpose and passion that comes out of what you just said. But perhaps we get to that. Let's just jump back to that gap year, because that sounds like it was a pivotal moment for you. You know, what caused you to take the gap year? And like, for many people, it sounds appealing, and then you get there and you're not doing anything, and that can be quite hard, right? So just tell us a little bit about that journey.
Sure. You know, the journey came from a couple of experiences I had. I mean, as I said, I've been having a quite rewarding and fulfilling career in building tech companies and doing interesting things and working with very smart people. But I did get to this point of like, this question kept in my head, to what end, right? And there were a couple of things that were not sitting well with my personal, you know, care about the environment. And one of them was that I was most recently at Seagate, which is a fantastic leader in the storage space and the hard drive space and so forth. But I saw firsthand the fact that for privacy reasons, millions and millions of drives get shredded every year by everybody after a first life. And so there's just this tremendous waste. And I remember that there were people in the company who were, you know, we owned the whole vertical stack from the drive to the solutions. And there were people who were saying, you know, we mine the minerals out of the ground. And this was like this vertical integration advantage. And I kept thinking, but we're mining the minerals out of the ground, right? And so I was conflicted about that. I was conflicted about the fact that I was flying all over the world all the time, to Asia and Europe and everywhere. And, you know, I just started to have this kind of shadow about the environmental consequence of technology. And that was part of the issue. And then part of the issue is that I'm just personally crazy passionate about kind of all things ocean, right? I love to dive, I love to surf, I love to swim, I love to sail, I live on the ocean. This issue of plastics and marine waste and so forth was also a big, sort of the cloud on the other shoulder. And so I just thought, you know what, let me step back and see if I want to course correct in any way, right? Yeah. And my gap year was not a year where I didn't do anything. Fortunately, I just kind of dove right in the deep end. I went to Honduras and became a dive master and did research with whale sharks and in aquaculture and in growing coral. And, you know, as I said, quickly realized that while that's fascinating, I wasn't going to suddenly spend my life under the oceans. I needed to actually make a living and so forth.
But it helps, doesn't it? It helps when you actually, I mean, rather than just sitting in your room thinking, what am I going to do with my life? Right. Getting out there, doing something, new experiences,
that's right.
Gets our brain thinking differently.
And it gave me the perspective of, hey, I don't want to throw away all the stuff I've built. I've built expertise and experience, and let me apply that, right?
Well, I had one client who was he wasn't a CEO. He was aiming to be, you know, he was like, this is my goal. I want to. And he wasn't that far away. He wanted a multi-billion-dollar tech company, and we were talking about giving back, and you know, his desire to give back, and his various things. But his thinking was, well, you know, it'd be good for me to find, you know, like some way that I could perhaps go and, you know, serve in a soup kitchen or something, which is perfect. I mean, great, and there's a spiritual discipline of like just humbling yourself and doing, you know, whatever it is. Great, why not? But in terms of like, hang on, you know, you're somebody who's practically a CEO, or, you know, has potential to be one of this tech company. You've got these networks, you've got this wealth, frankly. You've got these resources in the company and your personal. Just think about how you could turn those to use, because only you can do that, right? Only you can make an impact in that way. And I love it when people kind of start to join the dots like that and think, what's my Venn diagram that I'm uniquely positioned to do? It sounds like you found your little dot in that.
Well, it's part of an overall theme. I mean, I've realized later in my career that there's no such thing as work-life balance, right? Your work and your life are integrated. They're not separate things. Like I have long since stopped trying to think, oh, I'm going to try to create this separate but balanced, something. And it's the same thing, right? My personal passions, the things I care about, I've found a way to integrate them with my professional interests, which is great. I also do that with the other stuff, the day-to-day stuff, right? Movement, meditation, family, space. I work really hard. It's not always easy, but I've found that it's really important to integrate those things, because you just can't, I personally have not been able to design a life where you can have both things be totally fulfilling and rewarding and satisfied, but separate. It's just too much, right? They're too intertwined.
So apart from the work part, where clearly you find a topic and things that light you up, and we go with that, but some of those other things, how do you integrate some of those other things you just mentioned? I'm just keen to kind of get tactical for a second. What do you do to integrate those things you said: movement, meditation, whatever, family?
Yeah, part of it is time management, right? I mean, this is, I've found that I definitely need to schedule the things that matter, right? So I need to schedule time and be rigid about what gets overbooked and what doesn't get overbooked, and where obviously it's never black and white. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, I try to really protect my mornings so that I get my head in the right space. I get some physical movement, physical activity. And then I increasingly, especially now that we're so trapped behind computers and remote and Zoom and everything else, I have made a real, commitment to myself and communicated it to my teams and so forth, that I'm going to walk during a lot of these calls, right? Yep. So I get out, it's good for my sanity. There's many occasions where you don't need to be staring at each other, and you can have just as fruitful a conversation, and actually more creative when you're out walking and moving and more freeform, right?
Yeah, people have forgotten we don't always have to be staring into each other's eyes, for every conversation, especially if we know them and their colleagues.
Right.
And actually, on the sustainability theme, as I mentioned my wife earlier, she's part of a sustainability team, and they've made a commitment actually to turn off video on a lot of their calls, just because of the extra bandwidth and consumption and all the rest of it. So because they did the calculations and they were like, it's great, but we don't need it every time. We're on we're on all these calls every day. We don't need to see each other all the time. So
that's really interesting. I wonder, I would be really interested to see an analysis of, in the last year with the exponential increase in the use of video conferencing, what the carbon impact of that is. I would be really interested to see.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. Okay, so let's jump in. So so obviously this passion, this kind of finding this point in the Venn diagram was a key moment for you. And so tell us a bit about the journey with ITRenew. You're president, so kind of what do you get to do as president? What are you kind of focused on?
Sure. So I joined the company as Chief Innovation Officer nearly 3 years ago, and then about 18 months ago, I was made president. In the current role, I oversee all of our revenue generating activities. So our business is, as I said, we orchestrate this global circular model for the IT hardware industry. We work with almost all of the major hyperscale cloud companies. So think of, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Uber, Dropbox, those kinds of companies. We help them to decommission all of their outbound, very, very large scale fleets of servers and stuff that comes out of data centers. And then we create markets for those systems and those resources downstream. So sometimes they go into the market as reconfigured, recertified, or more general purpose rack scale solutions that go into data centers. Sometimes they get remanufactured into different form factors of compute and storage that go into different edge kind of environments. And sometimes they get sold as office components. And then of course, everything else gets recycled. And so we have this kind of mix of downstream markets and different different go-to-market motions. So the solutions business for data centers is one thing. The solutions business for remanufactured things going into edge is another thing, with different kinds of partners, different kinds of deployment models. And then the components business is altogether different altogether, right? And so my focus is those upstream relationships. I oversee all of the work we do with the hyperscale clients, and then I oversee all of the go-to-market on the downstream side of the business. So across that spectrum of markets and teams and sort of sales motions. What I don't oversee, what I partner with our CEO on, is the operation side of the business. So you can imagine, to do all of this, we have facilities globally where we are receiving equipment, transforming equipment, and so forth. And that piece is directly related to everything I do, although not under my direct purview.
Hello, it's Richard here with a quick interlude. These conversations are all about upgrading how you think about creating impact. So here's a resource to help you do just that whilst staying fast and focused. The CEO's checklist for challenging times is a quick way to enhance your thinking and detect blind spots, even when things are moving incredibly fast and you're not sure what's going to happen next. You can get this powerful checklist of 17 world-class strategies by heading to xquadrant.com/go/challenging times checklist, with a hyphen between each of those three last words. Now, back to the conversation. Got it. So, okay, so very external facing role. What's your success formula, right? So what are those 2 or 3 things that you possibly have used before, but that brings you to life and allows you to do what you do? Because obviously everyone has different ways of generating their results and making things happen and having an impact. So it sounds like I'm just guessing, but it sounds like you could be quite close to your sweet spot at this point in your career, having made some key moves. You know what you probably want to do and how you do it. So what are those things that are kind of combining at the moment to take things forward?
Yeah, I do feel like I'm in my sweet spot. I feel incredibly fortunate and grateful on a day in and day out basis, despite the kind of ebbs and flows of the business, because I am in this spot where I've been able to combine a lot of my expertise and experience with my passions. I think the general currents of sort of how I've gotten here are, start with the athletic stuff, right? It's competitive drive, right? I'm very, very focused on getting to success, and not just personal success, but win-win success, like aggregate success. So that's sort of underpinned a lot of my, different career pursuits and how I found my way to this spot. More tactically, I try to bring, kind of data and evidence to bear to be very rooted in solid kind of backing, to get people excited and passionate and working towards a really shared mission, right? And so then once you can do that, if you can do that, and it's not just I'm telling somebody to be excited about something, but there's really a compelling case to be made and it's exciting, then I think you can get a team that is like authentically vision aligned, and not just internal teams, but an ecosystem, right? That's what we're trying to do here. That's what I want to do in the large in my life, is get, catalyze movements and people and progress and change and transformation. And I think that only happens if you've really got this foundation of kind of data and evidence that people can lean on to say, aha, not only does that intuitively make sense to me, but I can back it up, right? There's great analysis there. And then you can get people like authentically aligned, and then they work towards common goals, right? Because they're not working towards somebody else's goal, they're working towards something they care about, right? So I think, that's sort of the way I approach things. And obviously there's a whole nother level of how do you implement that in teams and everything else. But on the surface, that's what I try to do, is get people super excited and passionate about it. So they're not just, following me or working with me or the company because they took the job, but because they deeply care about it, right? And thankfully, most of the people in our space now do really deeply care about this mix of technology and sustainability.
It's interesting, this whole idea about data, having data to rally people and get them bought in is a theme of another of these discussions that I did actually recently. So it's really interesting that it's coming up again. Do you have an example of, time where you've been able to bring data to kind of rally team around? Because I know sometimes at the very highest level of a mission, perhaps it's because you can have the resources to go and do the research, but there's plenty of goals and sub goals and things where it can be pretty hard to get all the facts together, right?
Yes.
So how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, well, I can give you an example from ITRenew. I mean, we, I think most people would acknowledge that we have a climate challenge, and most people understand that we have an e-waste challenge. Most people have heard that we're depleting the Earth's resources at a rate greater than we can sustain. And those things are intuitive, they make sense to people, but in terms of having those facts compel a changed behavior from a business decision-making perspective, a financial decision-making perspective, a purchasing perspective, it's sort of like, in the past, this sustainability thing has been, well, that's really nice to have. I'd love to check that box, but not if it's any less convenient, and not if it's any more expensive, and not if it's any of this and any of that, right? And what we did at ITRenew is say, how do we actually, we're advocating and evangelizing this circular economic model. We believe that recertified IT equipment should be like certified pre-owned BMWs, where there's no compromise to performance or quality or warranty or anything else. It's every bit as good, half the cost, much more sustainable. How do we get that? How do we get people to actually believe that and change their behavior based on it, whether that's upstream or downstream participants in the ecosystem? And what we did was we did a ton of research. We did a full life cycle analysis on racks of compute equipment so that we could prove that as much as 75% of the carbon impact comes from the manufacturing stage in a lot of common deployment models. And then we produced a report on this and we published it and we made it available so that we could then go to the market and say, hey, I'm not just telling you this. You don't just have to believe in your gut that circular economy makes sense. Like, there's real evidence of the fact that this makes a meaningful difference, and that at scale, this is like taking, millions and millions of cars off the road every year. It's like eliminating, millions of trucks full of e-waste and so forth. And so then people start to say, aha, okay, now I can get behind that, right? So, and we use that not just to get the company excited and to give the company the words and the data to tell their own stories, but also to compel the ecosystem to say, and, I'm proud of the fact that, most of the time in this day and age, you have to pay to get keynotes at various things. And with this data, we've been able to be invited free of charge to do keynotes at a lot of different forums because people care about this, right? We have the largest companies in the world making big net zero carbon commitment goals. And yet people are still trying to figure out, what are the tools and tactics to get there? How am I going to measure it? How am I going to get credit for it? And so I think that's where it's a good example of us saying, hey, we need to bring data to this story so that people can act as opposed to just think.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. And that makes you a thought leader, right? When you have the data, you're able to draw conclusions, show things, open doors, everything else. So hearing so you're somebody who's competitive, you love to win-win, you're very data-driven. And yet, I guess at this stage, you're in this moment where you're opening up so many doors in the business, so many avenues for the business, right? Because what you're doing is you're breaking new ground in the industry, and to break new ground, you just can't do it in one area. Normally, you've got to do it in many different parts of the value chain of the ecosystem. So that's potentially, creating a huge amount of complexity and areas of focus. So how do you kind of what's been your thinking around how do I going to manage this exploding set of opportunities whilst only having 24 hours in the day?
It's very challenging, and I will candidly say I'm far from mastering it.
It's not an easy one.
But this, this is probably my biggest focus area at the moment. There is no shortage of things we could go do and things to try and opportunities to go develop. We are in a space that is exploding. We have partners that we have are some of the largest in the world. We have to make markets happen at very, very large scale, very quickly. And so, you're right. Like, there's only 24 hours in a day. So I think, for me, this is probably the biggest challenge as a leader, but also for my team members. And it's about time management. It's about focus. I mean, personally, when I started my career as an investment banker, I was a like fresh out of school analyst as a banker. And I was known, I had a reputation as the most efficient analyst. Like when other people were spending all night in the bank, I would somehow figure out a way to get out of there at 2 a.m., right? Like I could get stuff done more quickly, and it was just focus. But I didn't have any noise then. I just had one job. I was just an analyst. I had one job. I didn't have any noise, right? And now, of course, there's many, many, many more things. And so to me, it really comes down to two things. One is how do you delegate with confidence? And the other is time management. And on the first one, it's really, about creating how do you create a culture that's fully about empowerment, accountability, and trust, so that people can run and people can build their own businesses and let me spend less time and energy on kind of some of the lower level decision making. But the risk of doing that is that you let people run and suddenly you have silos and communication gaps, and you don't have the transparency that you need to have the confidence, right? So the confidence is what lets you delegate. So I think there's, what I'm trying to do continuously is implement the right level of kind of rigor and process and systems, so that people know there's this quid pro quo. You get to run if our vision is aligned, and if you're following the process sufficiently that we don't have communication gaps. And at any given moment in time, we can see exactly what's happening in the business, and we can all jump in to collaborate and jump in to do joint problem solving. And people aren't suddenly off the plantation, right? And so that's a huge thing for me, is that culture of how do you create this division of labor and accountability, and yet joint problem solving and transparency, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, I have a concept called the transparency bargain, which is eyes on, hands off. So the deal is, I do need visibility, right? So visibility is not a lack of trust, but it actually allows me at that point, because I have the visibility,
that's right,
not to get involved. However, the danger is that throughout history, it's been shown when leaders get more visibility, they micromanage more, right? It's why the Navy, admirals got to sail around the world representing the king or the emperor, and generals in the army had to kind of send somebody back on a horse every night to get new instructions, because when you can control, leaders feel that they can do it. But if you actually really create that agreement of, okay, visibility, I need visibility because there's all these other things going on, but I'm not going to get involved in your operational decisions, then that's a deal that most people can kind of swallow.
Right. Yeah, and ultimately, when it works, then I find myself in a position of not having to make the decisions, but knowing enough to be able to ask questions about how the decisions are being made and why they're being made. And then people feel more empowered, and they ask questions. And to me, the more questions people are asking, the better it is, not the worse it is, right? That's a healthy thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it sounds like you're at one of these key impact multiplier moments, to be honest, which is, the complexity is growing so fast that for you to keep doing what you were doing last year, is absolutely not going to work next year. So you have to play a different part in this system and multiply yourself and multiply that.
That's right. And because it's the plethora of markets that we're trying to develop and the things we're trying to do, but it's also the team is physically growing from, a smaller number to a bigger number. And so you go from a truly more startup-y phase for a given initiative, even though the company is not in any way a startup. But in a given initiative, it goes from a startup phase where you have a small number of people doing all of the things to a bigger number of people in division of labor. And suddenly then you have to consciously say, okay, where are the bottlenecks? Everybody doesn't need to be involved in everything anymore. How do you sort of break that up and start to, separate and divide and conquer and so forth? So it is very much compounded by the cascading of different market opportunities, the team growth, and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, interesting. And often leaders, when we're fast acting, that can actually, that kind of wanting to do it fast actually becomes a bottleneck. I like to say you can't change gear when your foot's on the accelerator, and often that instinctive, like, there's a problem, I can solve it. There's another one, I can solve that. And we don't build those structures that allow us to scale.
I definitely personally wrestle with it.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think a lot of my clients do. I think it's Just because, to be honest, once you get to a certain level, you've got there on the basis of that problem solving. You can probably solve the problem faster than anybody else around, but
that's not
scalable. Can't be the
scalable.
bottleneck. Yeah, exactly. And I always say, do you go fast or do you build the team? And
Right.
do you go fast or do you build momentum? It's
Right.
it's these kind of things.
Right. That's right.
Yeah, very interesting. So, so I think we've talked about some great subjects, and we've really got onto, even as we spoke about that, about the future, because often, I ask people, where's the future for you? But I think we've really been talking about that, right? This multiplying of the team, of the opportunities that you address. But that kind of thing aside, like, given all of that, all of those dynamics, what would you, if you were to put your finger on it and say, here's the transition which you're going to have to go on, Ali, on that journey, what's that shift in leadership that you think awaits you in the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, if I'm thinking about sort of what my next level of impact is, right? I obviously want this company to be successful. I think if this company is successful, then we will have had a meaningful impact on the climate situation, which is great. But I would actually like to change the environmental trajectory of the technology industry in the large, right? I genuinely believe, right, the tech industry is the biggest industry in the world. It has the most powerful, positive potential for impact of anything, because it touches everything. It's pervasive, right? And yet there's this kind of negative, dirty underbelly. And it's not just the IT equipment. It's things like, artificial intelligence consumes an enormous amount of energy, right? Yeah. So the more high tech we get, the more environmental burden we carry, right?
Yeah, so make a Bitcoin transaction and see how much energy you've just used, right?
Exactly. And so I think there's a bigger game to be played here. And candidly, I don't know what I don't know yet, but I would like to be able to continue this dialogue and to catalyze the bigger picture change, and to get, to make sure that we're being long-sighted in our growth plans and our technology strategies and so forth. And that's going to require, a different set of more diverse experiences for me personally, right? A different set of learnings, a different type of pursuit of data, different relationships, right? It probably involves more public sector relationships, more philanthropic industry relationships, to converge more parts of the ecosystem to be able to pull these pieces together. So I think the work we're doing is a stepping stone, but it's that. I think ultimately there's I would like personally to say, hey, this is a piece of the puzzle, but there's a lot more. And ultimately, this is a conversation not for tech companies, but for every one of us, right? I mean, every single one of us touches this, whether we know it or not, in every aspect of our lives. And the onus is on us to create a conversation where people who are not in the tech industry understand the consequences of these things and are holding their vendors and suppliers and product manufacturers and service providers accountable, right? So for me, that's where I'd like to go. And I think there's an immense amount of learning I need to do to be able to get there and have that impact. But I think, hopefully what I've been working on is valuable, and then we'll figure out where the next, mines are for interesting information and opportunity to go help catalyze that change.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, we build the nodes, and then we build the connections between the nodes, and that's the next level often. You create something of value, and then suddenly, what are all the connections possible? And the value is often in the connections, and we didn't even spot them to start with, right? It's the gaps in between things that are where the value is often created.
Very much so. Yeah.
Well, Ali, I've enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your story, sharing some of the challenges, and just the passion and excitement, and thank you for what you're doing, to be honest, because our world needs it, right? And I think a lot of listeners, not everybody, but a lot of people are in tech and related industries, and I think there is a responsibility for the whole industry to have a look at what it's doing and do it better. So thank you for being a leader.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to chat with you, Richard. I really appreciate it.
Many thanks. Bye now, Ali. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others, who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level. If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.